Okay, so wrapping up ocean life, we'll focus on vertebrates like the fish in the photo from the aquarium behind me there. So let's get this up and running here. There we go. So the vertebrates, a lot of the most familiar animals are vertebrates. They can be pretty large, relatively familiar forms. And again, ocean ones are quite dominantly fish, but a lot of other types of vertebrates do occur in the ocean as well. Most vertebrates are fairly active, at least part of the time, and so that also tends to draw our attention. Fish, considered broadly, include a wide range of forms. We have a few types of, excuse me, jawless fish. All the living ones are somewhat eel-like in shape. This includes hagfish, like here. Hagfish are primarily scavengers, important deep water scavengers. They are known for being extremely slimy. There was a major mess when a truckload of them spilled on the highway out west a couple years ago. Lampreys are the other group of living jawless fish. Some lampreys, as shown in the picture here, are parasitic as adults, and so you have a mouth designed for biting a hole into a fish and slurping out fluids. But there are also a number of lampreys, basically just in freshwater, not into the ocean, where the adult does not feed the larvae or filter feeders, not parasites. The cartilaginous fish include the sharks and rays and their relatives. As the name suggests, they characteristically have a skeleton that is dominantly made of cartilage, like we have, say, in our ears. Not quite sure why red is popping up over there. Or the tip of our nose, things like that. Now, as you probably guessed, their teeth are not cartilage. Some sharks also have the middle of the backbone as bone rather than cartilage, but dominantly a cartilage skeleton. We also have the ratfish and the chimeras that are a mostly deep water group that are cartilaginous as well. Sharks and rays have a wide variety of different shapes and sizes and forms. They range from very large ones like the whale shark and basking shark with the size shown here. Those are the largest of the living sharks, and they are actually filter feeders. They have rather small teeth and are basically going along open mouth in the ocean to catch smaller things. Now, of course, there are sharks that are active predators, like the great white silhouette number 3 over here. But we also have quite tiny sharks. The dwarf lantern shark, you can barely see the mark for that down here, number 8. Another quite small shark lives near Japan, and so the Japanese name for it is Suranaga kabitozami, meaning dwarf shark with a long face. It's only about 11 to, come on hands, show up here, 15 centimeters long, so its name is bigger than it is. And so you have different some smaller sharks and rays. So the biggest rays, manta rays, are also filterers like the biggest of the sharks. Sharks have very different scales from most fish. They're similar to tiny teeth. In some parts of the world that don't have hardware stores, any of them at least didn't back when the fish all actually used shark skin as a substitute for sandpaper. There was also a claim that there was evidence for a shark having dandruff. That was because they found head and shoulders on the beach. But seriously, if we're talking about mating shark, usually shark is the object, not the subject of eating. Actually, sharks, as is typical for being larger predators, tend to have relatively few offspring at a time, and so are quite vulnerable to overfishing. And they are popular as food fish in various settings, as well as ones that are caught accidentally when people are trying to fish for other things. And so we're seeing some notable declines in sharks in many areas, including here in North Carolina. The vast majority of fish fall into the group of bony fish. Most of them, as the name suggests, do have a bone skeleton rather than cartilage dominating, although there's some variation there. And there's an extreme variety of different shapes and sizes with different lifestyles. Fish can be fast swimmers or slow, mainly sitting on the bottom. We have many different possibilities here. This one is an anchovy, a relatively streamlined shape. That kind of stretched out teardrop is very effective for moving quickly through the water. A fairly well forked tail also tends to go along with being a relatively fast swimmer. A broad, flat tail, not so much. Of course, sharks in particular tend to have the two branches of that tail uneven, but still going along with being fairly vigorous swimmers. This one conspicuously is not a fast swimmer. Seahorse, definitely not streamlined, and so moving slowly, relies primarily on camouflage and having a rather hard bony layer with the skin as protection. This one looks like maybe some sort of snapper here. Well-forked tail, fairly streamlined shape. This would be a fairly active swimmer. Definitely not so fast here. Much more broad tail, broad fins. Those would be good for more precise maneuvering and maybe a quick dart away, but not sustained fast swimming. So this one is more likely to be ducking into a crevice on the reef or something like that, rather than being fast swimming out in the open ocean. This is a scorpion fish, or rather it's the head end of it, not the whole thing. Rather lumpy and not very streamlined. This is going to be sitting around on the bottom of the ocean and waiting for food to come near. Scorpion fish, these have venomous spines. So need to be very careful with certain types of fish because of the stinging ability there. A big mouth that can open quickly is something that a lot of the bony fish have. It's a very effective method of predation in the ocean, and specializations with the mouth and feeding are important in a lot of these types of fish. And you can think of, okay, if you were to go, and maybe eventually a fly would fly in there, but you'd tend to be pretty hungry if you tried that. But if you were underwater and went up, you'd have a mouthful of water. And if there was a little fish right in front of you, the little fish would be inside. So that's the strategy used by a lot of types of fish. They're able to very rapidly open their mouth very wide, and open your mouth underwater. Water is going to flow in, and along with it, anything in that water, such as small fish or shrimp or whatever like that, or for that matter, a big one if it's an even bigger mouth. These are salmon, all the way having swum upstream, so maybe a little bit worn down. The different shapes are male and female. Salmon are famous for migrating. Excuse me. They go back and forth between salt and fresh water. In the case of salmon anadromous, they will lay eggs up in the stream, and then salmon, the adults, die after laying eggs. Not all fish that migrate like that do. Some make more than one trip. But in the case of salmon, they lay the eggs and die after having swum up the river. And the eggs will hatch and develop, and between the current and active swimming, get back down the river and into the ocean. And then they'll grow up to full size out in the ocean, and then make this journey swimming back up the river once more. There are some fish with catadromous pattern, most famously the standard American and European eels, which means that they lay their eggs out in the ocean, in the case of the American and European eels in the region of the Sargasso Sea. And then the young will swim and go up the rivers and grow up in the river, and then go back down as adults and out to the ocean where they lay their eggs. So you have both strategies present in different types of fish. Again, well, particularly the female that hasn't grown funny shape for courtship there. A somewhat more streamlined pattern. Tail. It's more muscular, not quite the just flappy look that we had in the damselfish a moment ago. Here's a very fast swimmer. This is a flying fish. They do not truly fly in terms of being able to power themselves through the air, but they are able to launch and glide for quite impressive distances. They have very broad fins to help them stay up in the air. Deeply forked tail, which you can kind of see in this picture. The bottom is longer than the top. Somewhat unusual, but it makes a whole lot of sense for the flying fish because it's bending its body back and forth to get speed for swimming. And as it gets fast enough, it's out into the air, but that back bit of the tail can still be in the water some and giving it some more push as it launches out into the air. Because it's got this escape trick, that bigger fish can't follow. It doesn't have too much in other defenses. And so a flying fish tends to be pretty easy to eat. It is very good option for bait if you're fishing for a bigger fish. They can launch themselves pretty high, get up good speed, and go quite a long ways through the air. This was demonstrated relatively vividly some years back. My parents, along with some students from the science club at the university were there at, went on a boat trip, and one fellow had not put on his sunscreen and got rather burned, and he decided he'd feel better sleeping with a sleeping bag up on deck rather than down in a bunk to be cooler. But somewhere in the middle of the night, he found he had company in his sleeping bag. A flying fish had managed to land on the boat and end up in with him. This is a triggerfish. Again, not so streamlined. Tail very broad, curved back, relatively broad fins. Again, built for maneuvering rather than for sustained fast swimming. This particular one is a also triggerfish, if I remember the species correctly. That rather strange pattern. Well, for one thing, if it's swimming in front of the reef, well, there's all sorts of stuff in the background that might not stand out quite so much there as it does in an aquarium. But also, first glance, you see spots and some stripes and all sorts of strange things. What you don't see quite at first glance is a fish. So this pattern may function as disruptive camouflage, where, okay, predator, I'm looking for something that looks like a fish. What was that? I don't know, but it looked like a fish. It works on people too. This was discovered, say, World War II. You didn't have to paint your ship to look just like the ocean. If you painted just kind of some weird random blotches and the like on your ship, pilot flying over trying to look for anything that looks like it might be an enemy ship, and what was that? Well, it didn't look like a ship. So this kind of disrupt the appearance may be quite effective. A close relative of this one is the Hawaiian state fish, the Humuhu Nuku Nuku Uapua. And yes, there are a couple of songs that take advantage of how fun it is to say that. Here is a grunt, back to somewhat more streamlined, faster swimming. It's got a bit more of the forked tail pattern. Body is a little bit more even, not quite so squinched the way the triggerfish was. This is a grouper, very broad tail curved out the other way, not designed for fast swimming. Also just on size, these tend to be relatively massive, popular food fish. Again, big mouth, this is going to be taking the approach like that scorpion fish of hanging out and hoping that some small fish gets complacent and swims in front of the large mouth there. Grouper are also fairly popular food fish. This is a moray eel. It is related to the standard true eels. But there are several different types of fish that have converged on this kind of snake-like shape approach there. Moray eels tend to look somewhat ferocious because they tend to have their mouth open, so you can see pointy teeth, but it's actually just breathing, letting the water flow through to the gills out the hole that you see on the side back there. Now, moray eels are not to be messed with. They can give a pretty impressive bite, but they aren't gaping to try to scare you. This shape, it's not as much for sustained swimming as it is for being able to poke into holes and crevices. The catadromous eels, the ones that actually come up in rivers, use their shape to actually be able to wiggle across wet ground as well as through the water. So they do swim impressive distances, but a bit different style from your standard fast-swimming open ocean fish. And some eels normally live down in burrows and don't come out very much. Here's another that's fairly obviously not built for fast swimming. This is one of the flatfish, things like flounder and sole, a number of different specific types in this group. These fish start out as babies looking pretty normal, but as they grow, one eye actually grows its way around to be on the side, and they actually are lying down on one side on the bottom of the ocean. And having an eye down in the mud, that's not doing any good. So having both eyes up on one side for any one particular type, practically all of them will consistently be either left side or right side that they're on. And again, these will be sit and wait, watching for anything edible to come near the mouth to grab it. Some of them can change their color pattern as camouflage. A number of them will also bury themselves somewhat. Although the ones around here are often popular food fish if they're big enough, there is, as noted back with the video of the Indonesian mimic octopus, we do have some species that produce a poison that discourages predators. Also, there's some other things that might be a little discouraging. Seafood, an important part of that is marketing, picking a name that people will want to buy. And so what fish are called on the menu and what they're called when you're looking at them is not always the same thing. One species that it's a little on the small side as well, but is not going to show up on your seafood menu anytime soon. One of the most popular flatfish for food over in Europe is the sole, spelled like the sole of a shoe. Over on this side of the Atlantic, we have a species related to the sole, but it's somewhat smaller, and it's known as the hog choker. Nobody's going to want to order that at the menu. Supposedly, pigs being tossed the fish that people didn't want out of the net had trouble eating them. One special type of fish, the coelacanth, we have two living species. These are lobe fins. You see the fins here are on stalks. rather than right at the body, the way most fish fins are. And in those stalks are bones similar to leg and arm bones. So it belongs to a very different group of fish. Again, not a speedy swimming type tail. These live in somewhat deeper water and hang out near rocky areas. Again, kind of keeping an eye out for smaller things to grab and bite. Besides fish, again, we do have some other aquatic vertebrates. Some of the reptiles, the most include the sea turtles. This is one, a green turtle. Most sea turtles only come ashore to lay their eggs, and then, of course, as babies hatching into the water they go. And then they stay in the water unless they are mature females ready to lay eggs. Green turtles actually occasionally will bask on a beach as well, coming out for a bit. But sea turtles have their legs modified into flippers. They're able to hold their breath for extended periods of time, spending quite a lot of time down underwater. We do have some types of crocodilians that spend a fair amount of time in salt water. For example, the salty, the large crocodile, one of the more hazardous ones to people, that ranges from Australia through southeastern Asia. And there are some other crocodiles that at least don't mind being out in saltwater. Some. The American crocodile is more of a saltwater one. Alligator tends to stay with freshwater. There are a few swimming lizards, notably the marine iguanas of the Galapagos Islands, and also a few groups of snakes that are specialized for living in the ocean. Most of the sea snakes are highly venomous, relatives of the cobra. There are a couple of different groups that are living mostly or entirely in the water. Most of the sea snakes are in the tropical Indian Pacific Ocean regions. There is one species of sea snake that doesn't mind being out in the middle of the ocean, swimming near the surface. And so those range widely across the warm parts of the Pacific Ocean, reaching to the Pacific coast of the Americas, as well as over around South Asia through Eastern Africa and Northern Australia region. Occasionally, one of those sea snakes will turn up off the coast of California if there's an especially warm year. There's a wide assortment of ocean birds. Like the sea turtles, they do come to shore to lay their eggs, but like the turtles, that's the only time that they are on land, although all of the seabirds and practically all other birds do also care for the eggs at the nest and do some raising of the chicks, whereas the sea turtles, once they bury the eggs, leave and do not come back. There are other types of birds, the familiar seagulls, for example. Most types of seagulls spend more time on land, though they'll be out in the ocean. Now, there's a couple of seagulls that are primarily ocean birds, like the kittiwakes, but most of them will hang out some on land, but also spend a lot of time with the water. The puffin here is one of the ones that, although it nests on land, will otherwise be out in the ocean. I'm not entirely sure how the puffin manages to hang on to all the fish without dropping one when it catches the next one. but they manage somehow. And we do have a few types of ocean mammals. We know the sea otter a little bit back. Of course, the whales are the most specialized for aquatic life. The manatees also very specialized there. And so we have some particular groups of mammals that spend basically all their lifetime in the water. Quite a few that will be to some degree around the edges of water, swimming, wading some, say, to catch fish to eat or things like that, but primarily land. But these are ones that actually are in the water essentially all the time. Of course, we also do have the group of the seals, sea lions, walruses, things like that, that are mostly swimming, but they do come out onto land for resting and things like that as well. So that's a relatively quick run through of a number of the types of life in the ocean. Close things out here.